Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in our really amazing series of See Tomorrow. It's been a really exciting series of conversations about kind of the future of tourism marketing and where DMOs are going to go as we come out of what has been an extraordinary year for the tourism industry. And I'm thrilled to have again a really great panel today and continuing this conversation and in the lead up to the eTourism Summit event in September in Las Vegas. Again, we're thrilled to be co-located with U.S. Travel at IPW in Las Vegas with the eTourism Summit this year, celebrating our 22nd year of really focusing on digital tourism marketing and really helping the industry continue to grow. So again, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all get signed up and registered for the live event and continue to enjoy these amazing conversations. So with that, I'm going to turn the stage over to industry leader from Fired Up Culture, Tammy Blunt-Kaplan. Nice to have you here, and thanks to everybody for joining us. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. Tammy, the stage is yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share some really great stories. I'm excited about today's conversation. As Will mentioned, I'm Tammy Blunt-Kaplan. I'm with Fired Up Culture, and I am thrilled to introduce to you a very cool panel of industry experts. We've got Gretchen Hall, CDME, who is the president and CEO of the Little Rock Convention and Visitor Bureau, and she's also the chair-elect for Destinations International. We have Mr. Chuck Davison, CDME, who is the president and CEO of Visit SlowCal, and he and I are both broadcasting from California, so it's good morning from us. And Mr. Paul Nursey, president and CEO of Destination Greater Victoria up in Canada. So as you can hear, we've got three very different destinations represented here, and some great industry veterans with some interesting stories. So we're here to talk about the opportunities that arrive from COVID, right? COVID-19 and 2020 was really sucky, and we're not out of it yet. But there's just no better descriptor than really sucky, because there are just so many things that were really sucky for our industry. It's been really difficult for many of us on a personal basis. It's been incredibly difficult on a professional basis, and to watch our industry go through what it has in the last year and a half has been traumatizing, but also uncovering some interesting opportunities for us as we come out of that. So today we're going to talk about, facing that as we start looking at recovery that looks really different for every different part of certainly North America. And for this audience, we've got two destinations here from the United States, one from Canada, and there's a lot going on here. So I want to just sort of start out by throwing it out to our panelists. Maybe we'll start with Gretchen, and just have a conversation about, give us a little bit of a situation overview of what's going on in your destination. Where have you come from? Just a bit of a background on where we're at right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I apologize. I think I froze for a second. Yeah, so real quick, I'll give you kind of a rundown. We never really completely shut down. We did have restrictions put in place, which those restrictions basically canceled all of our events in our facilities for the majority of the year during COVID, but we never officially shut down. In addition to being a traditional sales and marketing DMO, our organization also manages a large inventory of public event facilities. So we were juggling multiple components of this pandemic. We manage the convention center, the performing arts center, our outdoor amphitheater, and multiple parking operations. So again, we worked through those restrictions. We are essentially wide open at this point moving forward, and we're seeing a very fast return of events coming back to our facilities. Although during the height of the pandemic, we did have to have a reduction in force, like many of our partners across the country and even across the world in our industry. So our struggles and our juggles have been on both sides of the fence, both operationally in the centers and also just the traditional DMO side.
Thanks. Jack, you want to tell us about what's going on in your part of the world?
Yeah, sure. So, for us, California's, operated maybe a little bit differently than some of the other states. We were the first state in the union to shut down completely under the governor's order. And so that began quickly in March. We immediately, laid off the majority of our team and dramatically cut our budget. And, the market did reopen in the summer. So we started to open back up in July. And interestingly enough, for our destination, we had properties that recorded the greatest revenue in the history of their company in September and October, before we then shut down again in December and January. And got reopened again in February, and again saw and continue to see right now record numbers. We actually beat our March forecast by 100%. And our ADR in March of 2021 was 7% higher than it was in 2019, which was the peak of tourism for many of our destinations on a 10-year run rate. So our destination is back open. It's been wildly open, and I think because we are right in the middle of, we're 3 hours north of Los Angeles, 3 hours south of San Francisco, those major metropolitan areas that were closed for so long, those individuals were looking to get to what you see behind me, all of this open space. And so that served us much better than most during a really challenging time. And so we have worked, as many of us have, to find the silver lining in a very difficult time.
Paul?
Yeah, really interesting and a little bit of both situations. We're a pretty significant urban center here in British Columbia, but we're very exposed to the United States market, very close to Seattle, and I'm on an island below the 49th parallel. So the closing of the Canada-US border had a dramatic impact on us, including our meetings and convention space, which was also very much affected. We went from 60 employees down to 11, and then we were very lucky in Canada that there was a wage subsidy program that came back to allow people to rehire that allowed for 75% subsidy of wages. So we got it up to about 14. Much like everyone, last summer we had some limited domestic travel, which was very helpful. We had some pent-up demand then and had a pretty good August and September of last year, but then we went into a second shutdown. And then maybe unlike my colleagues in the United States, our vaccination was about a month and a half behind. And during that period, some of the variants from overseas came over, and we really had quite a severe third wave. We really much controlled our first and second waves, but the third wave hit us hard. We're just getting out of that now, and we are reopening. And we are now hearing fairly well substantiated rumors about a kind of a phased reopening of the Canada-US border in the weeks and months ahead, which would be just excellent news. So big reductions like everyone, but we're getting through it now, and we're optimistic going forward.
Paul, can you expand a little bit on the travel restrictions that still exist for you right now?
Yeah, so right now, even within our province of British Columbia, which is the size of the United Kingdom, but only has 4 million people in it, we're only allowed to travel within a very limited region. Travel within the province, and it has been enforced by law enforcement for the first time kind of ever in Canadian history. So we're running at between 5 and 20% occupancy right now. On June 15th, we're expected to go to intra-provincial travel, and then July 1st, travel within Canada, which would be very helpful. So we are on a road to recovery right now, but it was, especially when the variants came in kind of February, March of this year, they really buttoned it down. And to be fair, it worked. We were able to get on top of the outbreaks pretty quickly, and we're getting through the tail end of it now. And our vaccination rates are now up over 70% for the first dose, and the second doses are coming quickly behind. So we'll get out of this quickly. We're just a little bit behind.
I'm glad to hear you're catching up, because for those of you that don't know, I'm Canadian and I'm dying to go see Paul. So and my family that also lives in British Columbia. So we're all looking forward to that, and that's affecting so many other things for the Canadian market, which is a whole nother webinar. Let's talk a little bit about while we're talking about reopening, before we talk about how you might be reconstituting your teams. Destination organizations have been in an interesting position, if you will, in that we have, ourselves in our industry that are, our main concern, our big concern, certainly beyond public health, is ensuring that our tourism businesses come out of COVID, that they're still existing when everything's back open. We have a resident base that doesn't always like the idea of inviting more strangers to our community. And we have different attitudes of government on reopening as well. And again, all three of our panelists are really facing very different circumstances around that. So can you talk a little bit about that position that you find yourselves in, and where you, what are you doing about that? How are you approaching that to find that delicate balance between the resident sentiment, what the government is allowing, and what your customers and your business community is looking for? Jump right in there.
I'm happy to jump in a little bit because it might be kind of interesting, and you're right, we will probably have a counterbalance. Our political leaders really did, and that's what was the most disappointing, is they really did play on the fear of travel. And they played on it again and again and again and again. And I've had very frank conversations with them, even though the medical evidence was that there was some transmission, but it was very minor. But it was politically expedient, and in leadership, tone at the top matters. So we're expecting equal strong support as we reopen. But it was very interesting to have a very frustrated business community and then very popular political leaders who found really good traction with the message that we're going to keep you safe and we're going to take all measures to keep you safe. And if that means really taking harsh measures against travel, then that's what we're going to have to do. And that didn't help the resident sentiment piece at all. But we're doing a lot of work now in terms of telling the story of the vital element of the visitor economy in our community and the amenities that bring. But it's been a very challenging period. And when it comes back to teams, we found roles such as corporate communications, research, social media, earned media became much more important in our organization, and were protected as opposed to some other more traditional roles.
And Paul, you took a really strong leadership stance in the face of the feeding on the fear of travel, not just on behalf of your organization but with an alliance. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we constituted an alliance of leaders within the community that, and it became very uncomfortable to actually be countering the message of the premier of our province and the public health authorities, which, operate the provincial level or the state level equivalent. And, they have all the institutional power and authority. And we were the ones out in the media often offering counter messages. And it's very clear that we were, self-serving in our interests, but someone had to do it. Many people were scared to do that. And we created an industry of private sector. And we, of course, we engaged communications and government relations experts in that. But it was a very uncomfortable place, but we had to do it. And I think we got some wins out of it, including some subsidies and some supports and some grants and contributions for the industry that wouldn't have otherwise happened.
So I'll jump in a little bit. So we're in a little bit different scenario where Little Rock is the metropolitan capital in a very rural populated state. So oftentimes, in fact, the majority of the time, our city regulations were much tighter than our state regulations. And sometimes that created some confusion, it created some frustration. And so we were stuck in the middle trying to help balance that. Now, the good part was I myself and others in our industry were tapped to have a seat at the table when they were creating those large event restrictions at the state level. So we could try to counterbalance some of those, mass gatherings and how we could really balance the health side with the tourism industry side. But when it came to the subsidy component at the state level, at the beginning, tourism was really lost. And so we had to, much like Paul, create a contingency of our private industry partners and our statewide DMOs to really raise a red flag to say, look, tourism has long been the #2 industry in this state. And these businesses, if you want them to survive, we have got to find ways to create some additional relief for them. The restrictions that are in place are necessary, but that's obviously causing a loss of business, and we've got to find a way to utilize some of those relief funds. And we were able to put a package together that was really a lifeline until we could properly get reopened. But balancing that, us being a metropolitan area, a more urban center in a very rural state, and very differing opinions on how to handle the pandemic health-wise, some of the conversations got pretty interesting.
And you had some of your health officials looking to some of the practices that you established, yes?
Yes. Yeah, so it's more or less surreal when the health department's calling us saying, hey, can you help weigh in on some thoughts on how we should handle large event facilities? And we said, well, sure, we can give you some opinions, but we're not the health experts. So, but we were also able to help them point out some factors when they're trying to create these regulations at warp speed. And when they produce some of them, we instantly found parts of them that were contradictory, right? So we went back to them and said, this doesn't make sense that you're allowing a gathering of this size to take place in a private business, but not in the public event space when essentially the gathering is the same. We had different restrictions on private dining in restaurants versus dining in hotels and meeting space in hotels. And so we really did have a lot of conversations to help them understand the operation side of how these rules and regulations could really be implemented and adhered to.
Yeah, I would say much like Gretchen, we got, one, I would say the advocacy role that we've taken in the community for the last 5 years definitely helped pay off. And this time I'll start by saying we're a nonprofit. So, we don't work for the government, but their partnership is extremely important in our ability to succeed as an industry. And so, I found myself standing next to the head of the health department doing daily pressers, talking about the exact same thing that Gretchen was talking about and figuring out how you deal with that. And the county really pushed into us because of the trusted voice that we are in the community in a time where they were really having a difficult time, just government in general being trusted. Our county took an adversarial approach originally. They actually ran ads in our feeder markets telling people not to come. And so if you know anything about the California market, one of the ads that they ran was in the Central Valley, what would be Bakersfield, Fresno, places like that. That's a population that you tell them not to do something is actually encouraging them to do it. So after about 3 weeks of the county spending, $10,000 on social media ads and finding out that there were actually more people here than there were before, we actually asked if we could give the county some money to keep doing that. No, we didn't actually do that. I'm kidding. But they finally gave up and pulled those ads. And, we had to work through a lot of challenges with the messages that suggested in the community of travel not being safe. We've got over 200 hotels in the market, and never was there one reported case in any hotel in the entire community. And we have stood behind that for the last 16 months. I think for us now, the message is very much shifted because we've got a lot of elected officials, because of the success that we had during the pandemic, who believe this is the new norm. We don't actually need to do anything. All these people are going to continue to come, which is a message that many of us have lived with for decades. And so I equate this, I use an analogy that hopefully will make sense to the audience if you've ever been to the southwest part of the United States. I use the In-N-Out analogy. So, you go to In-N-Out, you can get a hamburger or a cheeseburger. You want chicken, you can't get that. You want fish, you can't get that. You want salad, you can't get that. You can get a hamburger or a cheeseburger. We were an item on the In-N-Out menu during the pandemic. For the people in Los Angeles and San Francisco, there was no cruise ships. There was no international travel. There was no theme parks. There was no major metropolitan communities that were open. As a matter of fact, if you lived in Southern California, there were times that the beaches were closed, and the only beach that you could actually access would have been ours in the county. And so we had a plethora of people that came here because they didn't really have a whole lot of options. We're now getting ready to move from the In-N-Out menu to what I would call the Cheesecake Factory menu. So the Cheesecake has like 30 different types of cheesecake. Forget the appetizers and soups and salads and entrees and all those other things. It's 30 pieces of different cheesecake before you ever even order, right? And so we're about to go from a limited option selection to the world being completely back open. And, we were able to introduce the destination to a lot of people who might not have come here in the past. And I believe they will come back, but they will not come back at the same propensity. And we're about to get into a much more competitive environment for travel. And so we're trying to explain to the elected officials that, no, we actually need to go back to work in doing what our organization was established to do.
So as we face a very different and still somewhat uncertain future, not that our future has ever been locked in, but it just feels a little shakier than it might have before. You are all approaching how you run your organizations. In some cases, absolutely different priorities, certainly different organizational structures. Share what you're doing as you face the future. What does your new organization look like? How have your priorities changed? And have you eliminated some positions? Have you implemented some brand new positions? What does that look like?
I'll jump in just to keep kind of the rotation going here. So what I've learned through this is we had 60 before, and I'll maybe need 20 to 22 coming back, right? And so I think we've coined a term called cross-functional ninjas here. And when we made our reductions, I really focused on hard skills. So I kept our economist in research, and I kept our digital expert, but they're also now doing member services, and they're doing other things as well too. Some of the more soft skills side of things. I'm not going to need 4 people in tourism and travel trade anymore. I'm going to need 1, and we'll outsource more to, we partner with a global agency that has global representation. So we're going to outsource more to experts. We have in our world very heavy severance obligations under common law is what it's called. And, every employee comes with a large obligation on the balance sheet. So, but on the other hand, we do have the opportunity to upskill our current employees. So I really see a future with a smaller number of employees where we actually invest more in them. Even in the depths of our lows, I was investing in training and development of our employees, and I wanted them to have something come out of COVID, a hard skill, a certificate of some sort. So I see, maybe a group of 20 to 22, and we have responsibility for our convention center as well too. So there's a lot of different things, but they'll be doing a lot more broader scope. So we'll need to pay them more and invest more in them as professionals. But we're not going to solve problems by investing in more labor or hiring another coordinator or another kind of admin clerk, but we're going to really focus on heavy skilling up and compensating them accordingly.
And part of the outcome of that is my apologies. Part of that is a different balance in your budget, right? Where your personnel would have been a bigger chunk. So just sort of in general terms, what does that allow you to do in market investment?
So generally speaking, we would have run about 33 to 36% labor ratio before. And I don't want to put a number on it yet, because 2021 and 2022 are going to be kind of weird years. We have a lot of rebooked conventions we're going to have to support and underwrite. But I see by 2022, 2023, our labor would probably be around 25%, maybe a bit lower, which would allow more unencumbered marketing and sales dollars. But that slice will be, we're going to do some comparative work and some benchmarking. They're probably going to be better compensated because we'll be expecting more from them. And it's going to be a really interesting and dynamic model, and I'm really excited about it. But it's still going to take some time to settle out and find those right people and make sure that the current people really do want to engage in this bright new world. And so far, they really have stepped up. But everyone's facing some fatigue coming out of this as well too. And it wouldn't surprise me if people want to travel the world or pursue that doctorate degree or pursue their bliss in some other way, right? So we'll have to let all that shake out.
Yeah, I've used Paul's cross-functional ninja quote several times, especially during the skinny skeleton days of pandemic, when we were all tapped to do more with less. For us, our reduction in force organization-wide was about 40%, but on the operations team, it was about 70% of our team. And so we're having that same conversation. And Tammy, to your question, are we looking at org chart redesign? Are we looking at new positions, eliminating positions, future focused, hybrid? Yes to all of the above. And for us, we've had numerous conversations about, you don't want to let a good crisis go to waste. And we're having the conversations about what does the future look like? What should our organization be focused in the future? How does that go back to restructuring and retargeting our own organizational charts? What changes in the industry and our community have we seen and are we seeing? And how do we really recruit for the talent that we want and the new positions and processes that we see coming down the pike? We're having that same conversation before every single job posting. Now, for flip over to the other side of that, workforce development it's a huge issue. It was an issue before the pandemic. Now it's even a bigger issue on where do you find the talent? How do you find the talent? Where is the talent? I mean, our unemployment rate statewide is at like 4%. There's a tremendous number of individuals that A, left our industry, but B, that have left the workforce, period. So we're struggling with that as well and trying to figure out what flexibility can we offer. We're figuring out new structures on the pay scale, just like Paul mentioned, in order to get that talent. For me, it's also a real struggled conversation to have with some of our managers, to have them think differently about reviewing job applications and figuring out what talent and soft traits you need that may not come with the previous experience level that we were used to seeing in some of those job applications, but making sure that we're hiring the right person that fits within our culture to help move us forward. And that's extremely hard to do when they're stretched so thin and they're drinking from a fire hose and they need, additional workforce right now, because to do it right takes a lot of time. And so I'm worried about that burnout rate that Paul mentioned as well, with the staff that has stayed with us as we're really trying to get that org chart correct moving forward and get us positioned for the future, and just finding the right candidates in a very thin pool of applicants right now.
Yeah, I think the same would be, true for us. We went from, we had a team of 19, 15 full-time, 19 total. We went all the way to 5 in mid-March of last year. We've since rebuilt that to, I think we're at 11 today. We've got a series of open positions for next year. We are in an interesting spot because in January of 2020, we renewed our tourism marketing district, our funding model, for an additional 10 years. And at that time, we increased our revenue by 50%. So it went from a 1% assessment to a 1.5% assessment. That kicked in on July 1st, right in the middle of the pandemic. So we actually never got to see the benefit of that. What it did do was make us a little more whole when, revenues to the community were down. We were getting a larger share. So I am about to propose next Wednesday at our annual board meeting the largest budget this organization has ever seen. We'll actually move 33% beyond our pre-COVID budget of $6 million to a little over a $9 million budget. And so much like Paul, we have a cap on our essentially our administrative payroll services, right, of 22%. But because we're raising our budget so significantly, that gives us a growth opportunity. So we are, not only because of the budget, but because it's the largest scope of work this organization's ever undertaken, we're going to need more people to help do that. And actually a little plug for Tammy, because she's helping us figure that out in some culture work that she's doing for our organization right now. So, we're focused on that. I will say that there's 2 areas that I'm really pressing in on. I said earlier, if it hadn't been for our relationships with the government and how closely we work, we're an interesting destination. We've got 7 municipalities and an unincorporated county. So I have 45 elected officials that I work with on a daily basis. If it wasn't for the relationships that we have with them, COVID would have been a much larger struggle. And so that advocacy piece, we have a director of advocacy, a role that we've had for years. And so I'm actually looking to double down on that and actually bring in a vice president of advocacy above that and gain even more traction in that space for our community. Equally, we just pre-COVID had finished a destination management strategy, what we refer to as Experience Locale 2050. How do we proactively make the destination what we want it to be over the next 30 years? And there was an interesting recommendation that came out of there that our board approved in March, right before the governor closed the state. They got put on hold. And that recommendation is for us to hire what we're referring to as a chief investment officer. And so this individual would be responsible for going to the investment conferences, lodging, attraction, real estate, across the United States and Western Europe to help draw attention to San Luis Obispo County, California as a place for people to invest. We're not as well known of a destination as Monterey and Santa Barbara to the north and south of us. So people who are in the hospitality space in California might know the destination as investment. but those who are outside of the market likely don't. And so this individual will work more from an economic development on tourism standpoint, and that will then tie into the same comment that Gretchen made about how do you develop the talent and the attraction and the labor workforce in order to be able to do those things. So that's a job that's kind of unique. I haven't come across anybody else in the United States that's actually playing in that space at that level. And so we're really looking forward to getting that kicked off next year and trying to find the right person to get into that role.
It's pretty exciting stuff. I love the difference in the stories and the creativity with which all three of these leaders are approaching what our future may or may not look like, but drawing some lines in the sand, at least, and having some grand plans. As we're sort of looking around the country, I'm really seeing kind of three scenarios. The smallest scenario is people looking to rebuild exactly as they were before, because it's just not the same world that we're living in. We don't see too much of that, but we do see a little bit of it. I see a lot more of two different extremes. One is what Paul's been talking about, where they've gone from a much larger organization to a much smaller organization, outsourcing some things, putting senior level folks in positions that are of priority for the organization. If it's a short-term project, using contractors versus employees and that kind of thing. Alternatively, the other extreme we're seeing is eliminating several agency relationships and bringing that stuff in-house. So we're seeing more graphic design, more agency work, more of that coming in-house. And so when someone asks, what is the typical allocation in a budget for staffing, it can be as low as 25 or 30%, as Paul's outlined, but we're also seeing a trend that is much more like 40 or 45% with the elimination of those agency fees. And that's an interesting outcome for communities as they're taking a look at when you're dealing with government. Where is that money going? Is it staying in our community? Is it staying in our state or our province, or is it going elsewhere? And so I wonder if any of our three panels sorry, I didn't prep you for that question, have some thoughts on that one. Where are those conversations that your community is having? Is that a contemplation? And I mean by that the budget allocation, or where that money is going, whether that's agency fees or within community.
Yeah, I don't mind jumping into that because I am doing something that's a bit contrary and maybe a little less politically safe. But because the second model you outlined, Tammy, was exactly where we were before. The previous 6 years, we had brought graphic design in-house. I'd hired more researchers, built up a lot of capacity. And then even pre the COVID, I thought we were just getting a little too big. I found, and it's just a feeling that a CEO has, right? That, that comes with a lot of management, that comes with kind of office relationships, just adding more complexity and kind of layers to the organization. Everyone's working hard and doing well. But in my particular situation, and I don't only stress this, it's only my experience, I had already thought that we had drifted a little bit too large pre-COVID, and then COVID happened and there was no other choice. So building back, we're doing things a little bit differently, but in 2 or 3 years we could pivot again and bring those things. But just as we are so focused on recovery, and I think our closures in Canada have been a little bit longer, and the economic pain has been a little bit deeper. We just have to put every cent that we possibly can into the market and lower that overhead bar. But I'm certainly a fan of the other model, because if you can have a cohesive team and have services in-house and have, for example, young professionals right out of their university with their graphic design, getting a junior role in our shop, that's a better outcome for our community. Right now, we just don't have that luxury.
Yeah, we're trying to balance all of those things, right? So as we're coming back in some of the fields where we're having the hardest time finding staff, we're looking at temp labor opportunities, which are going back into the community. That's still helping, even though they're not our employees. And we're looking at, is that relationship a great relationship long-term? Are we getting a good quality product? Most of that's on our facility operations side, trying to tap into those temp labor pools. We're also contemplating some trial periods to bring on some different staffing levels and talent. But then from the contractual standpoint, we're having those conversations as well. We've always, even pre-COVID, had kind of that graphic design and creative team in-house, but we have an agency. And so we're looking at when does it make sense to outsource to other agencies, and how do you balance that? Do we have a great local agency that is within our market that we can really tap into their talent? Or is that talent, that tool and that capability outside of our market? And how do we balance those spending components? And then the third conversation that we're having that layers on top of that is, how do we also intentionally focus and move a needle on all of our EDI initiatives? And that goes not only with talent and staffing, but that also goes to where are we spending our money with, our subcontractors and our partners. And we're considered a government agency. We are not part of the city. We're not a city department. We're completely autonomous of the city, but we are considered a government agency. And so we have very strict procurement and hiring policies that we have to really get creative in how do we maneuver and make sure that we're adhering to those policies, but still meeting those goals and targets that we set out.
Yeah, I think much like Gretchen, we're trying to strike that balance as well. Prior to my career in the DMO space, I ran casinos in Las Vegas, and we had an ad agency that we were spending $7 million with, and I brought an internal team of 26 people that we put together to build our own internal agency, and it cost us about $2 million a year, and they worked on demand, right? And so we weren't one of several other audiences, and we still used agency for big scope of work and mass campaign, but we had a team internally, and so that's. Hopefully this is a safe space, and I don't have board members or anybody on here, but that is my plan here as well. If I didn't have a screen, behind me, you'd see a glass wall that's got this mapped out on it to build this in-house agency concept. I'm fortunate because just earlier this month, I hired Kathy Cartier-Toll, who many of you may remember from her time in Las Vegas as my chief marketing officer. And so Kathy has got amazing brain trust and just super strategic in the way she thinks. And she is completely on board with this plan of, bringing an internal agency, to fruition. And so I think we would always use a bigger agency to help, strategize. We don't want to drink our own Kool-Aid, but our model would be such that it also becomes a revenue stream, because so currently we're managing the advertising campaign for the airport. As I said earlier, we've got 7 local municipalities, all of which have DMOs, and so they're spending millions of dollars a year, and we're in the process right now of rolling out what we call a House of Brands campaign. And so again, 18 communities across an entire county. How do you get all that to kind of roll and bubble up to SoCal? So if you think about Marriott, and they've got Fairfield and Spring Hill and Town Suites and all of these things right under the Marriott umbrella. That's the concept that we are trying to create here. And so what better way to do that if we were helping them create their advertising and their messaging that would then align with the work that we're already doing. And so it also creates, continuity across the market. And even when we talk about talent attraction and development, we've really pressed into the local economic development organizations don't have money to figure that out. And quite frankly, they're not good at asset sourcing. We have all of that. We should create the campaign, and they should pay to place them and distribute them. And so that development of that agency process would help streamline much of the work that gets done across the community.
So many good ideas, and I want to follow up more. However, we do have some questions from our audience, so I want to give that a little bit of airtime. So we'll go to the first one. I'll just read it, and whoever would like to jump in there and answer, go ahead. Some of the important ingredients in an organization's success and survival are partnerships and collaboration. Are there any unusual partnerships that helped with in the past year that you would continue to rely to strengthen?
I'll speak to one, and it was an existing relationship, but it completely transformed. We have some local media outlets, and we really deepened our relationship, both on kind of the paid relationship but also the editorial side of things. Really leading into that. And a couple of our media outlets are community owned, and you can really see the difference between branches of corporate owned entities. So we've really deepened our relationships, and we're able to get just a ton of editorial. And of course, when we make our advertising decisions, they become front of the line. But the ability to pick up the phone and speak to the editor, the publisher, or the CEO of an integrated broadcast channel really help get our message out, both on kind of the news front and also on the more traditional destination marketing side of things.
Nice.
Yeah, I think one that we really grew, again, it was an existing relationship, but I think we grew it heavily, and that was our state association of CVBs or DMOs, and all of our partners. Again, I mentioned, Little Rock is the major metropolitan area, and then we've got a lot of other small rural, more rural destinations, and then we've got a cluster of destinations up in Northwest Arkansas as well. And so we really tapped into the ability of having Zoom. And we all have different degrees of resources and research availability at our fingertips, right? And so also tagging into Chuck's conversation about advocacy, that group became a much bigger voice on the advocacy side, where we could go and touch those elected officials in every corner of our state. We could get on a call and talk about with our state tourism office also, because at times the state tourism office can't take the same message that we can. So we really worked with that partnership. And now it's led to additional marketing partnerships, right? So we're developing a product in our destination. One example is our mountain biking trails. We've always been known for our outdoor trail system, but primarily a paved trail system. And most of the mountain biking was in Northwest Arkansas, or in a community called Hot Springs, an hour from here. And Little Rock really didn't have a lot on the mountain biking trail system. Right in the middle of COVID, we opened up a partnership with our state parks to create kind of the real first great mountain biking trail development. We've got another great mountain biking trail development that is another public-private partnership that will open in a week, actually. Next week, I'll be going to the grand opening of that. And we're already looking at how do we tap into media partnerships with our DMOs in Northwest and in Southwest Arkansas in order to create some packages on the media side, the influencer side, and even the touring group side. So I think tapping into our local community of DMOs has played very beneficial and will continue moving forward.
Yeah, I'd quickly offer one that might seem a little bit strange, but that would be our relationship with public health. I'm ashamed to say that I had no idea who the head of public health was before this pandemic, and I guarantee she didn't know who I was. We now have a great professional relationship, and I find that important because from an advocacy standpoint, we bring in events with tens of thousands of people, that there's a public health impact, right? There's restrictions on how that event does their work. We work with the restaurants, across our entire county, and they've got public health issues that they have to address. And that's never been a space that we could really wade into or be at all helpful with. And now we're in a position, because of the relationship that was forced to be built, to really advocate on their behalf and be a little bit more intelligent about the way that we're speaking to those types of situations and how they impact the tourism community and our partners. So I think that's something that we will continue to press into and keep, again, I often say, if you wait until you need a relationship to build it, it's quite frankly too late. And so, for us, keeping that relationship warm and making sure that we're staying on the radar with those individuals, I think will pay dividends for our community in the future.
It's a interesting perspective on the public health partnership. I wish we didn't have to have it, but it's an important partnership. And I would say the same, when I was the CEO in both Tacoma and Monterey, forging new relationships with the Office of Emergency Management for wildfires or other horrible things that you need to deal with, and letting them know that you can actually be helpful in that endeavor is always a great sort of non-traditional partnership as well. Again, not one that we want to forge, but a really important one to have. And when there is an emergency, it's nice to have that in place before you actually get started. Another great question here. So I heard some diplomatic complaints about political/elected leadership about perceptions of travel during COVID. Objectively, travel and tourism leadership at many levels, associations, organizations, et cetera, was lacking. What are your thoughts if given a chance to introspect? What would you say as leaders are some of the qualities, skills that you would want to gain or see in future leaders in the tourism destination industry?
I'll quickly jump in. So I think it goes back to Chuck's conversation about the advocacy component and making sure that industry leaders at every level, and that can be starting with our residents and then going to leaders within the community and then elected officials at the local, the county, and the state level. They need to understand the true picture and the value of our industry. And you can't wait until a pandemic to start those relationships or try to have those conversations. That advocacy needs to go on throughout the year. They need to be touched at multiple levels. That's where kind of that group think helps. It's not just, in Little Rock, it's not just me taking that message. It's our industry partners taking that message. It's our state partners, our other city partners taking that message. And you've got to make it personal. So for us, we're finding ways to tell the story about, well, without tourism and without that economic impact, here's the quality of life initiatives that you won't have in your community. We wouldn't have these facilities. We wouldn't have the opportunity to host these events. We wouldn't have, this trail development, whatever the case may be, but you've got to bring it down to the personal level and make sure that you're establishing those relationships and having those conversations in a multitude of ways. You can't just say tourism generates X jobs and tourism generates X dollars for the community. You've got to make it real personal to each of those elected officials.
Yeah, in my mind, it's two things. It's trust and it's leadership, and you have to have the trust first. And so when this pandemic first started, 2 days in, the county administrator called and said, "Hey, Chuck, we need your help communicating to the community, to the residents, to the visitors, to the, and it's because of the work that we have done in advance." And look, the elected officials didn't have any more information than most of the other of us had, and it was super challenging. And no matter what decision they made, there was going to be 50% of the people who were frustrated with them. And so it was a hard road. Our relationship and the leadership that we've shown in our community, and the fact that we had been at the table with them before is what led to the success in doing that, and their willingness to engage us. So when you think about leaders and future qualities, getting that engagement again to occur before you need it, that's the time that you spend building relationships is now, so that when you need to leverage them in the future, you can do that.
Yeah, I'll also quickly add to that and piggyback on something Paul said earlier, and that's about that relationship with the media. So it's not just about the relationship with the elected officials. You got to have a great relationship with your media, and we do in Central Arkansas. And so thankfully, maybe double-edged sword, during the height of the pandemic, we were getting media calls weekly. Like, can you tell us what your thoughts are? How is this going to affect our community? What's it going to do to our convention center? What's it going to do to tourism? What's the big number? What research, what figures and facts can you give us? Because they knew that we had those numbers and we had that information. And so everything we pushed out from a messaging standpoint that we wanted our elected officials to hear, and unfortunately, we probably pushed out more negative information, but you had to give that truth. You had to make sure that they understood the impact and the research and where it came from, but become a real trusted media partner. And there were weeks I was exhausted talking to the media, but we had to get that right message out, and that relationship really paid dividends here for us.
And just to put a fine point on this, because I was the one that raised it, it was a really interesting situation here because we had so much support from a municipal level and the media, business community, and our residents. Our polling for the support of tourism stayed at over 98%. But somewhere in a certain slice of our elected officials, they got onto the key messaging that honing in on travel as a cause of this was a safe place for them to operate. And we were in an election cycle as well, which didn't add to the timing. So back to your question around skills, I think the skills to have is to build a broad coalition so that when you do find yourself in that unfortunate situation that we found ourselves in, where one or two political leaders, made the political calculus to just dive deep at this, and we happen to be the target, that you have others around them and around us that are able to buttress our message. So it's that building those broad coalitions, because it was very interesting and something that I've never experienced before, to actually be the target. And it was, I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but they made that political calculus, and it resonated. So it was a very, very interesting situation.
And way to get buttress into the conversation. That's always a good word to add in there. Excuse me. The third question on a great conversation. Third question on our from our attendees is: most DMOs are and behave as marketing organizations. In a crisis like we experienced, marketing was not a tool to get us out of crisis. Overnight, DMOs cannot change from M marketing to M management. It is different. It's a different kind of organization, different kind of leadership and qualified people and stakeholders. So the question is, do you think DMOs of today have the will, the patience, and the skills and experience to be a management organization in the new future? And what do we need to become management organizations in addition to solely marketing organizations?
This has been the esoteric debate for about 5 or 10 years now, right? And I think we've already been involved in this for many years leading up to the pandemic. So I find the DMMO debate interesting because we're already in it, and I think most of us already are and have been. Chuck's got an incredible master plan. Gretchen is actively managing facilities. We're doing some things here, so we have a suite of tools, and so I don't think it's an either or, it's a both. And I think all of us have been there for many years coming out of it. And I personally find the marketing versus management debate more academic as opposed to practical, because practically we're already neck deep in management and have been for many years.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Practically speaking, if DMOs aren't already involved in that management side, I think they'll be left behind. I think you'll see that in a lot of conversations. If you're just a marketing agency, then you get into well, why can't I just hire an ad agency to do your entire job, and we don't need your organization. So I think for those that feel that is their only role in a community, they will be left behind.
Yeah, I have, so I would say, when I was contemplating this job, it was one of the requirements for me to come to work here. I was not going to take this job unless they let us advance the management space, because I firmly believe that you can't market a destination that you're not managing. That's going to go the opposite way with resident sentiment and all these other things. So you're just going to create more challenges than value that you're going to provide. I think when you talk about our DMOs, in a position to do that, I think it's different for every community. I mean, we started from the beginning, laying that groundwork. And so I would encourage, and I have this conversation a lot based on the destination management strategy that we did. I would encourage organizations to, in many ways, put their money where their mouth is. If you're going to do that, then you have to create a structure that allows that to be successful, whether it's creating an advocacy position in your organization or putting somebody into a community engagement role that is going to help you bridge the gap and gain consensus and understand what it is that how you work with the broader coalition to accomplish. Look, we developed this amazing destination management strategy that has 28 recommendations over the next 30 years. We can't do any of that without our strategic partnerships in the community. We don't own brick and mortar. That's not who we are. It's not what we do. And so although we brought all of the community leaders to the table to help, create this master plan, it will take all of us working together to get it done. We don't own, Scott Beck would press back on this conversation. Scott Beck would say, you don't own the destination, you can't manage it. And I'm not suggesting managing it literally from the brick and mortar standpoint. I'm suggesting managing it in the mindset of the way that we operate. And so I think if you're a destination destination that's not in that space and you're trying to get in that space, one of the greatest things you can do is get a segment of your board rallied behind that initiative, who can then help carry that through to the elected officials. Because we've heard from elected officials, why are you wading into this? And it's, well, this is the direction of the board, and this is what we're going to do. And I know for those who have struggled with that piece with their board, it makes it really, really hard to eventually advance the initiative. And so I would start there.
Awesome, thank you. And Chuck, you raised a really good point, and that is that it's different for everybody. So, you know, the role that a destination organization takes in being a catalyst for their community, or involved in the nuts and bolts of it versus just the brand management and the marketing of it, is always going to be different. And I think, you know, one of the other points that we want to emphasize as a group is that nobody has all the answers. There is no magic bullet, but hopefully, because we live in such a collaborative type of community, destination organization folks is what I'm talking about. We can continue to share stories and learn from one another and inspire one another, and that's a big deal for us. So if you're out there and you are feeling like you don't have all the answers, you're not alone. I think that, you know, lots of people make some great educated guesses and we're forging ahead, but that doesn't mean that there's a crystal ball on anybody's desk. Although I do see hand sanitizer on Gresham's. So we've got 5 minutes left. So if there's any final thoughts, we would love to hear them from you before we close up.
Well, I think, you know, my final thought would be, first of all, what a great honor to be on this panel. And I've made some notes from my colleagues here that are just great pearls of wisdom. So it's been a very enriching experience for me. Is that, you know, just to embrace change. I think, you know, not change for the sake of it, but, you know, well-researched, take some well-researched risks, because, you know, any notion that our world coming out of this is going to be similar to our world coming out of it is just, I think, a foolish idea. I mean, the world has changed, the economy has changed. I don't even know what international travel distribution is going to look like yet. I'm still trying to wrap my head around kind of domestic and maybe cross-border. So how can we plan kind of the human side of our enterprises when we don't know what our customers and distribution and the business landscape is going to look like? So I may have the best plans for the next 6 months, but they may need to change again in 6 months and then the year after. So I think being flexible and open-minded is going to be critical in terms of recovery.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like the advice of really focusing on some calculated risk, using all the research that you can get your hands on and try to make some really great future forward-thinking plans, but be willing to change them and be very flexible going forward. And I think for some people, because we're all in different varying recovery modes, right? I mentioned early on, you know, we're pretty much wide open. Chuck's now opening up and kind of fluctuated, and Paul hopefully very soon will be wide open. And so, and we hope that for everybody, but I know during parts of the pandemic, depending on where you're at in the recovery, make sure that you don't get just caught up in just being paralyzed. We really had to focus on that too, because paralysis kind of set in for a while, and just it's so easy to look at all the negative, and you got to find a way to get out of the weeds, be forward thinking, but be willing to take a few calculated risks.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with both of those. I think, you know, over this last 16 months, I try to think about what I learned coming out of this. I mean, you know, there were some hard days where I wasn't really sure how we were going to get to the other side. And so I think, you know, some acknowledgement on my part, even to the team, that, hey, I'm not sure really where we're going either, but we've got to continue to press forward. I go back to, if we hadn't built the system that we did, I can't imagine how much worse it would have been. So I'm super grateful for that. I will say I know more about testing and vaccines and government programs than I really ever wanted to know. And so I'm not sure what that means, but I will say that there was significant personal and professional growth for me in doing that in just a different way that I would have never expected. I'd also say that I became more optimistic during the pandemic, which is weird for me because I like to think of myself as a realist. But, you know, we started every day in our team stand up with, I pushed the team on, what are you thankful for? I think it was really easy in the pandemic to fall into how bad things were, and things were really bad. And I think acknowledging that is important, but things were way worse in other places than they were here in San Luis Obispo County. And so I think that was an important. I think the last thing is, we've been so focused on the recovery for business, and I failed in the recovery for myself. My tank's empty. I am spent. And I'm not good at self-care. And, that whole thing of putting your oxygen mask on first before you help somebody else, I'm not good at that. So I'm going to do something I've never done. 2 weeks from today, I'm going to walk away from the business with zero connectivity for 6 weeks. I'm going to spend time trying to rebuild myself, focus on how I've been pouring myself out for this last 16 months, and now how I pour something back in so that I can be a better leader, I can be a better husband, I can be a better father, I can be a better friend, I can be a better, community resident. And so I think maybe this pandemic and being a little bit older has hopefully made me a little bit wiser. And, so that's the direction I'm moving.
Awesome. I can't think of a better way to end our conversation than with that. So thank you, Chuck and Paul and Gretchen, for your time. Thank you to our audience for joining us. And there will be a recording posted on the website. So thank you again. We'll hope to see you soon and in person in Las Vegas in September.
Thanks, guys. Miss you all.